few months ago, we made a video about the first edition of Warhammer 40,000, and people seem to really get a kick out of it.
In fact, statistically speaking, if you sub to this channel, it's probably due to that video.
So, because of that, and because there was so much we didn't touch upon in that video, and because it was 40k's 30th birthday recently, we thought, why not take one more dip into the 80s space oddity and share with you 10 more weird and wonderful things from Rogue Trader. Because what are diminishing returns?
I loves getting stuck in! Loves it!
One of the coolest factions from old 40k, in our opinion anyway, were the Genestealer Forces, so it was really nice to see them return as a fully fledged army recently after being absent for so many editions.
But one of the things that hasn't returned is that your Genestealer cult could actually be a Genestealer Chaos cult. Yes, in Rogue Trader you could make the Patriarch of your brood decide to join with the ruinous powers of Chaos, in a fairly pragmatic look we can both help each other out here kind of way. Seems weird now, but Genestealers weren't Tyranids back then. They were their own thing, so they had their own agenda. Still, there's a whole army list in the 40k compilation book if you want to run an army like this.
So that means that you get not only regular Genestealer troops, but you can have access to much more heretical things like beastmen, mutants, and even summon demons. You can even have your Patriarch undergo demonic possession. So if you decided to align with Khorne and roll well enough, you can have a Genestealer Patriarch possessed by a Bloodthirster, which I think we can all agree is pretty darn rad.
Although, granted, it is also possible to be possessed by Nurglings, which is a little less impressive.
Die, heretics!
Camouflage is not something one usually associates with Space Marines. I mean, there's entire chapters of them painted bright blue, so unless they visit whatever blasphemous dimension Eiffel 65 originate from, it's unlikely they're blending in anywhere. Really? Eiffel 65? What? However, whilst it's rare to see now, in Rogue Trader it was relatively common to show variant colour schemes where their power armour was camouflaged to fit whatever place they were fighting.
Sure, it was the 80s, so their idea of camo was often pretty garish. I mean, wherever the Space Sharks were using this pattern must have been pretty fucking hard on the eyes, but still, it was a thing. They even did it with vehicles, like, can you guess which chapter this Rhino belongs to? No? It's the Ultramarines. This one? The White Scars. Or how about this one? Okay, that one's a trick question, it's the Imperial Guard, because they could also use Rhinos in 1st edition. Land Raiders too.
Look, there weren't many vehicle models around back then, so sometimes you just had to share.
They are flotsam in the psychic sea.
Last time we talked about Inquisitor Obi-Wan Sherlock Clouseau, probably the most infamous 1st edition 40k character, but he wasn't the only one that was a little, unusual.
In issue 97 of White Dwarf from January 1988, they fleshed out the Ultramarine Space Marine chapter, and alongside well-known characters like Chapter Daddy Marnius Calgar, and characters no one really cares about like Holmes Singer, the Apothecary with an acute if rather unnerving love for chainswords, you'll find the rules and bio for Ilian Nastase, the Chief Librarian Astropath of the Ultramarines. What makes him so special is that he was not fully human, and not in the usual Astartes opposed human kind of way.
You see, Ilian was born on Badab after a war you might have heard of, to a human mother and an unknown Eldar mercenary father. He was then raised by the government, who sent him to Earth as a potential psyker. He then became an astropath, rose up the ranks, even serving with the Dark Angels for a time, before eventually ending up with the Ultramarines as Chief of the Macragge Interstellar Communications Link. From there he would ascend to Chief Librarian Astropath.
So yeah, there's a few things to unpack there. 1. He's half Eldar, which is apparently possible and fine. I can't imagine that any openly half Eldar child would last long in the modern day incarnation of the Imperium, let alone manage to attain a high status in a Space Marine chapter.
2. He's a librarian and an astropath. They're both types of psyker, sure, but generally people don't get to be both.
3. He doesn't appear to be an Astartes. Apart from his psychic abilities and the whole being half Eldar thing, he just appears to be a normal guy, lacking any Space Marine augmentations. Although he wasn't alone in this, as there were other non-Astartes in this issue like Christo Columbine.
And finally, 4. Ilian has a remarkably similar name to 1970s Romanian tennis player Ilie Nastase, which, due to this being 80s GW, is presumably an intentional reference, but knowing nothing about tennis, I can't for the life of me figure out why.
Skulls for the Skull Throne!
In each edition of 40k there have been a selection of different game types and scenarios, some more narrative and complex in nature, and some little more than just lining up your forces and beating the crap out of each other. If you played Rogue Trader and wanted to play a new scenario but couldn't find one you liked, there was a convenient plot generator you could use in the main rulebook. There's a ton of different things in here, so let's just roll some dice and see what we get.
First, we roll to get a broad motive. They're things like investigate new world or quell a rebellion on this Imperial planet. We roll a 95, which is oddballs and special operations. Spicy. You then roll to see which specific mission you get. In the oddballs and special operations category, there's stuff like vampires/gene stealers have taken over the crew, or an inquisitor finds a strange artifact. We roll a 17, which means we have to deal with a robot uprising.
A robot building factory has gone crazy for some reason. The robots are wandering about killing people, and some have escaped into the city where they are causing considerable panic. Enter the factory, destroy any rogue robots, and shut down the production lines before the whole city is flooded with them.
Don't ask us what to do if neither player has any robot models, but I guess we've all had to proxy models before. Tabletop gamers are resourceful. We always manage to find a way. For added flavour, you can also enhance the game with a subplot. These are things like mines litter the area, or even the psychic clowns of Dr. Gostello's amazing intergalactic psychic circus. Are fucking serious? Even that the psychic clowns of Dr. Gostello's amazing intergalactic psycho circus are roaming the area. However, we roll a 58, which means...
Whilst the players battle it out, a further alien force lands and enters the fray, perhaps hoping to take advantage of the disorder to fulfill some mission of their own.
So, a robot uprising with a side order of an alien invasion. Certainly better than the clowns.
Now, these roles and the specifics of how this would all actually be played are supposed to be worked out by the GM, who in the plot we rolled would presumably also control the third alien force, which I guess he'd have to hide surreptitiously under the table to maintain the surprise. So many of these plots would kind of fall apart if you didn't have a GM, but even then, these kind of things are just neat as a springboard for your own ideas.
As a side note, there's an adorable little note at the end of this section asking you to send in suggestions for additions to the plot generator, especially if you've got a real humdinger winner of an idea. Emperor bless their little cotton socks.
I got me a natural throwing arm!
Rogue Trader had a plethora of different grenades you could use. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to suggest there were probably too many. Just in the main rulebook alone, there were the following types: Antiplant, Blind, Choke Gas, Crack, Frag, Hallucinogen, Haywire, Knockout Gas, Melter Bomb, Photon, Plasma, Psych Out, Rad, Scare Gas, Smoke, Stasis, Stun Gas, Tanglefoot, Toxin Gas, Virus, and Vortex.
We'll be taking a closer look at the hallucinogen grenades. Basically, these things emit a gas that has strange and unpredictable effects upon the mind, and you roll a d10 on this table to see what the effects are. Just so you know, we're looking at the revised version of the table from the Warhammer 40,000 Battle Manual.
On a roll of 1, you hallucinate your limbs turning into tentacles.
On a roll of a 9, you become so depressed you just slump to the ground and can't do anything for the rest of the game. Which, to be fair, is how I tend to play 40k anyway.
On a roll of 10, suddenly, it's all so clear. The fighting, your fellow troopers, everything. It's all so funny. Nothing matters anymore. It's a huge cosmic joke. You begin to laugh.
It's all so fucking hysterical!
And to many, probably the worst, on a roll of a 3, thousands of spiders drop onto you, crawling into your armour and inside of your clothing, swarming over your face and hands. You fall to the ground clawing and scratching at your own body. So yeah, enjoy that mental image. Blech.
Actually, you know what? Since we're halfway through this list, there is something we'd like to address from the last video.
A lot of people commented on the fact that we called this thing a dinosaur.
Those dinosaurs are in fact the first Tyranids. They're called the Protonid.
The dinosaur was an original Tyranid.
Not a dinosaur, concept for Tyranids.
Dude, those aren't dinosaurs. Those are old school Tyranids.
Foolish casual. That's not a dinosaur, it's a Tyranid in its earlier design.
It's a fucking Tyranid!
So yes, this thing, not a dinosaur, it's an early Tyranid. Obsessing over it being a dinosaur was kind of a joke, but no, you're right, it is not a dinosaur. But since Aaron Dembski-Bowden thinks it's better if it's a dinosaur, and he writes books for Black Library, how about we just call it even?
Things shall get loud now!
Crass were a British anarcho-punk band and art collective that formed in 1977. They played many of their early gigs with the UK subs, who, oddly enough, our band has actually played a festival with, and their history is genuinely pretty interesting even if you don't care for their music, what with their overt political stance and numerous brushes with controversy, even being discussed in the House of Commons due to their song How Does It Feel?
Now, you're probably wondering why we're talking about Kaos in this video about little plastic men with chainsaw swords. Well, despite so much of mankind's past being lost by the 41st millennium, according to the Rogue Trader rulebook, Kaos' work did survive in some form. We know this because this guy on page 126 has a tattoo of the Kaos logo on his arm.
Now, we know that this is just a reference hidden in there by an artist who probably just quite liked the band, but we'd like to think that in the Emperor's Gallery of Human Achievement on Terra, in one of those little glass cabinets, he has a pristine copy of their album, Penis Envy.
I do this for a living.
One thing that came up several times in the comments of the last video, in between people telling us that Dinosaur was actually a Tyranid, was the existence of female Space Marines in Rogue Trader.
And just to head this off now, a certain kind of person tends to get a little weird and gross in comment sections when you talk about female Space Marines, so how about this time you just don't? Anyway, during the Rogue Trader era, there were models of women wearing what appears to be Astartes power armour, and there was a magazine entry for a female Space Marine chapter. The former are, as far as we can tell, not Space Marines, they're just wearing power armour. Probably best to think of them as precursors to the Sisters of Battle, officially they're part of the Adventurers line. The latter magazine entry, however, well, that's a bit more interesting.
No doubt many of you have seen this entry on the Little Sisters of Purification, an all-female Space Marine chapter with a crap name and a crap logo that would be damn near impossible to actually paint on a pauldron at 40k scale. Interestingly enough, they not only mention that they're all female, but that there are many other female Astartes chapters, and that their armour looks identical to their male counterparts. Which is nice because it meant that they didn't need new models, but also because that's just how armour works. In reality, stuff like boob plates on armour are only a good idea if you like funneling blades towards your sternum. The entry is a part of a campaign called Sunstroke, and it all looks very official until you take a look at the top of the page and see that this doesn't come from a Games Workshop publication. This comes from a 1988 issue of a magazine by a totally different yet similarly named British wargaming company founded in the 70s, Game Designers Workshop. The Sunstroke campaign was printed in issue 36 of their magazine, Challenge.
So what these little sisters really represent is not that there were once female Space Marines, but that this was a time when GW was a little more loose with the brand, allowing other companies to print campaigns for their mainline games and even demonstrating how you can make 40k models out of other companies' products, like this Zoid or even rather famously, an empty stick of deodorant. But for old time's sake, and because female Space Marines seem to make some people super mad for some reason, I went ahead and painted up a modern Beaky as a little sister. Went with my own interpretation of the logo though, because no.
We got it, boss! We got it! What do you want with it?
Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka is a huge tank of a character. Decked out in mega armour, this prophet of the Wa towers over his fellow greenskins, leading innumerable orcs into brutal, endless war. The current version of his model is from way back in 3rd edition and holds up really well considering its age, which is more than can be said for his 2nd edition model, which doesn't really fit in with the modern version of 40k orcs.
However, there is an even older version of the model from 1st edition that we're told originates from issue 134 of White Dwarf, but since we can't get hold of that, we found it in the sourcebook. Here we go. So here is the original model for Ghazghkull. Not quite as intimidating as the current one, is it? This model was actually a minor conversion of an existing war boss rather than a bespoke one, although there is some artwork of this version which does make him look a little bit more like the Gaz we know and love, in the attitude department at least.
To be fair, since orcs get bigger the more they fight, you could just say that these 3 models show his growth over the years, starting off as a smaller war boss on the planet Urk in 1st edition before eventually growing into the warlord known as the Beast of Armageddon. Just maybe ignore the fact that his missing eye disappeared in the 2nd edition and then came back on the wrong side by 3rd.
Your inadequacies shall bring you low.
Whilst there are many mechanics in 1st edition that aren't a million miles away from their modern counterparts, some are quite different, and often way more complicated than necessary, like vehicle movement for example. You see, vehicles had a turn radius, you couldn't just spin them around at will, there were very solid rules for this sort of thing. The rules state:
Turn radius ratio, or TRR. A non-hovering vehicle turns by wheeling rather than making precise angular turns. The radius of the wheels always equals the forward speed of the vehicle in inches multiplied by the turn radius ratio. The distance traveled by the vehicle is measured along the inside of this curve. The hell did I just read? That doesn't make any sense.
That bit of text and this tiny image are all the help you get deciphering this rule. I mean, I get what it means, but when you factor in other things like vehicles having acceleration and deceleration values, it's a rule that could really do with some examples of how to do it in practice. Fortunately, in the later White Dwarf Compendium, where more rules were added for vehicles, you can find a nice guide that spends a page and a half explaining how to measure it out, including numerous diagrams and the sentence. The turning rules don't change, but let's go through them here to make sure everyone's clear on how the system works.
Which sounds to me a little like a very sheepish way of saying, our previous explanation was terrible, we're sorry, here's a much better one.
The Emperor's light is my torch!
This artwork of the Emperor on the Golden Throne is one of the more iconic images in 40k, and is also immediately familiar to anyone who's a fan of a certain 40k web series. But there was a version of this scene in the Rogue Trader rulebook too. Would you like to see it? Bam! Look at this dork. However, we don't bring this up to mock the image, we mention it because we think it actually brings something different to the table that the later art doesn't.
In the later image, the Emperor looks, despite his corpse face, powerful. He's sitting in a commanding position upon his mighty golden throne, eyelessly casting judgment upon all before him like an underweight Conan. The old version, however, is very much not that. It's a sad image. He looks weak and totally unable to actually rule. It suggests that he, much like the Imperium itself, is on borrowed time and could fizzle out at any second.
What's interesting is both of these interpretations are fundamentally accurate. The Emperor is more or less just a corpse sustained only by arcane technology no one really understands and the sacrifice of many, many thousands of lives. But at the same time, he's also the most powerful human who has ever lived, whose presence, even in this weakened state, holds the entire Imperium together. Both of them tell the truth, just from a different angle. And just in case anyone mentions it, yes, there is another picture of Emps in the book, but it's kinda weird and lacks the interesting implications of the other one, so
You could say, although it's not necessarily something we believe, that the Rogue Trader image is actually a more physically accurate representation, and the latter image is maybe closer to Imperial propaganda, making the weakened Emperor appear more powerful and covering the sad-looking truth. Not saying that's true, just, it's something to think about.
Just don't think about it too loudly if there's any commissars nearby.
So that's 10 more weird and wonderful things from Rogue Trader. And the thing is, there's still so much more in these books that we haven't touched upon. As we said last time, it's a bizarre and charming thing, representing not only the origins of a setting we know and love, but also kind of a time capsule of the era it was created in. There's just so many things, both large and small, that are fun to read about, far more than we could ever cover in videos like this.
So yeah, don't just let us tell you about it. If you can, track it down yourself, give it a read, and immerse yourself in the wonkily drawn, overly complicated, and very tongue-in-cheek world of Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader.
And hey, look at that, we managed to get through 2 videos about Rogue Trader and we only mentioned the squats once. Thank you very much for watching, and also a very big thank you to Remlays of 40k Theories, Michael of Tactica Imperialis, Drummer Matt, PlasmaDragon, the Fresh Sorcerer, Longfang, Bruva Alfabusa, and EgoQueenAlexis, who all recorded voice lines for this video. Also, extra special warm damp hugs go to our patrons. They are Badgerish, Battlebarge Lobsters, Billy, Kiva Brennan, Colin Turpin, Colin, Dennis Davison Jr., Jab725, Jeremy Stern, Little Mikey, Longfang, Mass Observer, Matthew Lynn, Maximum, Mega Slippers, Nat3 Despolas, Ordo Xenos Agent, Pin Barlow, Rabin, Riser DR, Rosalind Wells, Sam Stanfield, Sexual Yeti, Slow Elk, Smirky, Soul of Lemon, Stalker, T4RK4, The Gaffer 87, The Mecha Knight, Uneven Frostgun, Unfailing Eagle, Unit Y, Val the Knight, Willow Quinn, Zed, and Zach Adamson. We are also truly and deeply sorry to anyone that doesn't follow us on Twitter and therefore has probably no idea what's happening in the background right now. We're sorry.